Madhouse podcast. It's been a while, I know, but going to try and get back into the habit of doing these. it's it's one of those things where you do it and you get into the habit of it, and you can do it each day, and then you don't do it for a while, and suddenly months have passed. it's I don't know. It's quite challenging because I suppose it takes a special sort of skill to just be able to talk off the cuff without too much planning. Um, and it's not a skill I clearly have as well as I perhaps would like to. And if you do too much planning and you work too much from notes, it sounds too scripted, and I don't really think it works. And I remember from when I was doing the podcast last year that the ones that tended to seem to get more hits and better response were the ones that I kind of spoke off the cuff, and the ones where I just planned and went through a series of things didn't seem to get as much traction. So where are we? So a few things I was going to talk about today. First of all, Dungeon World is due now. So if you're a player of the game Dungeon World, then you should be getting your turns in today. We won't be probably running until about Wednesday night, and that's because there's a bunch of things that kind of come together. But long-term players will know this happens quite often. And I thought it would be helpful if I explain why, because I know for some people they get a bit frustrated. They say, well, if the game is due on, say, Sunday, why can't it run Sunday night? And sometimes it can, but very rarely. The reason is because the nature of the game is that turns go out every 2 weeks. And players get their turns 2 weeks ago, and then they start looking at them and they start thinking about their orders. But they don't. Very few players put their orders in the next day. Some do, but very few. And even those ones that do often think of things they want to do later. So they might want to add a new character or rename a character, or they might want to move a character or join a mission, or all the various things that don't happen automatically. They have to email me as the GM and Game Master for people who don't know the terminology, and then I have to kind of action it. And so what happens is, for the first, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 days after a turn, very little happens. And then for the last 4 days, everybody sends everything in all at once. And that's my workload. So when it comes to running the game, what I do before I run the game is, there's a few things I do. First of all is there's some paperwork and things I have to do, some bureaucracy that I have to go through, deleting old files, making backups, checking that no files have become corrupt. Then I have to go to where the orders are stored on the server, load all of those. Then there are people who send their orders by email. I have to load all of those. And then once I've done that, I have to check all the areas, because the game is constantly growing. And people who are in the middle of the game, in the bits of the game that have been there for 15 years, I don't have to check any of that because that's been there for a long time. But the new bits of the game, the edges of the game that are constantly growing, I have to go and look and make sure everything's working, make sure that I haven't missed a bug, because one of the things about a game that's constantly growing is there will be bugs. That's the nature of it. There's no way around it. We've almost got a never-ending commercial playtest in a way, and that's the price you pay for a game that never stops having new things. But so what I have to go and check the edges of that, and that takes a while, to make sure everything's okay. And I often miss things too, but that's because it's a big game. And then the next thing I have to do is I have to look at all the emails I've received, which have people's special requests, things like name changes and things they want to do in certain areas, and some guild stuff and various things. People are always sending me emails for things they'd like, and there can be 100 emails in a turn easily from different people about different things. New guild sign-ups, they have to be done manually too, because there's no in-game function to do it, or not easily anyway, not that couldn't be abused. All of these things could be addressed. So for instance, I could make it so that instead of signing up new guild members, the guild leader could write an order to sign up a member, and that would happen automatically. I could do that. It would take quite a long time to do the coding for that, but I could do it. But the reason I never did it is because it could also potentially be abused. Then what do you do if a guild leader signs up someone they're not allowed to sign up? I could put in checks, but that makes it even more complicated to code, and some of these checks are a bit nebulous. If you are allowed to join one guild but not another guild, but yes, a third guild, and only on this instance, and some people get one item and some people get another item, it all gets quite complicated. And guilds, to be flexible, had to be able to be a little bit complicated. So I took the decision early on that I would manually do guild sign-ups, and that's worked quite well, I think. But the downside of it is it's another job for me to do each turn when the turn comes around. So then once I've done that, and you can imagine at this point that's a day or two's work. And then I have to do bug reports. Now, On a good turn, I might get 4 or 5 bug reports, and some of them will be very minor, like when I hit with a sword, it said he instead of her, and I'm a girl character or whatever. So they can be quite minor. Some of them can be quite complex. This thing that was written 50 years ago by a person who no longer works for Madhouse um, is broken in this way, and I'll look at that and I think I don't even remember what that was about. I don't remember what the idea was. I haven't seen it in a decade. Um, I've got to go and look through code written by somebody else to try and work out what they were trying to achieve and what should be happening and if it really is broken. And sometimes it gets very complicated. Anyway, bug reports. And on a bad turn, you could get 15 bug reports, and that might take, I don't know, 10 minutes or 10 hours to fix, depending on the nature of the bug. And I don't like to run the turn without fixing the bugs. I've always tried to fix any bug report I get before I run the turn, so that's how you make it a growing, almost commercial playtest rather than just a bug-ridden mess. You don't want that. That would quickly annoy everybody. So, and I think people tolerate the fact that they will occasionally run into problems by the fact that those problems generally get fairly quickly fixed. 1 or 2 exceptions I've had over the years. There's been a couple of bugs that just couldn't work out how to fix them, and even those I did eventually for the most part. But sometimes you've got to cut your losses and write off that little aspect of the game permanently because it's just you don't know what the problem is. So, for instance, there was a problem with some of the new employees, which I think I've fixed now. Had any recent feedback saying they're still broken, but people might just have thought, well, you haven't fixed them, so we won't look at them anymore. I don't know, but I think I've fixed most of those new ones, or maybe introduced new bugs. This is one of the things that you find out as you go. So then at that point, even up to that point, when you think you're getting ready to run, you've done all of these various jobs. Even at that point, people are still sending in late character sign-ups and late problems and even late bug reports. And some people, helpfully, send them in like 2 days after the deadline when you really should have already run the game. And I always get them, and because my commitment is to try and fix them before I run the game, I then have to delay again. And I could write a line under it, and once in a while I have, if there's just no way around it, say I'm going away somewhere or something, have to get the turn out by the set date. But most of the time I'll just go, no, got to do it, because otherwise these things just accumulate. And then we've got Madhouse USA. Now, love Madhouse USA to bits, and I think Neil has been a fantastic GM since he took over, but I've had great previous GMs as well, not knocking them. And they do a brilliant job, but what they do is they make it possible for people in America who can't play by email to play by post. If you can play by email, you can play direct with Madhouse UK. But if you can't play by email for whatever reason, and we won't go into that right now, but if you can't play by email, you've got to play by post. You go through Madhouse USA and Neil. And there's more than 100 players playing that way. So it's not an insignificant player number. And these are all dedicated players taking part in the game, playing, joining guilds, adding new items to the game, adding their excitement and enthusiasm and their own ideas to the game. So I value them. The trouble is, of course, that for them it takes even longer to get their turns back, because there's no way they could do it on day one, because they don't often get their turns. They have to post them to them by surface mail, and they have to sometimes get into institutions which are difficult to post mail to, let's say. And so you often get these turns coming back right at the last minute, and as has happened this turn, the GM will be like, well, there are a bunch of fairly important players, and when I say important, I simply mean players who are really integral into the game. I mean, if somebody's just got 2 characters and often misses their turns and doesn't seem as dedicated, I suppose, to the game, or at least as concerned about every turn as some people are, that doesn't make them less important from a company point of view, but to the actual game's integrity, it makes them less important, just not to me as a company. So that's what they would mean by that. And if you've got these players who, if they miss their turns, they might have 3 positions all full of characters, and it's going to cost them a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of upset. And it might be that they've arranged a lot of things for other players, so there's knock-on effects. And I'll get this email and it'll say, look, we've really got to kind of wait and see if some turns come in on Monday or Tuesday, and that then comes alongside all the other stuff. Now, then once every sort of 2 or 3 months, you get a perfect storm, and the perfect storm is created by if this all coincides with one of my 5 new areas releases or one of the special offers, because both of those take a lot of additional GM time. With the 5 new areas, I have to manually move all those characters to the new areas, and I have to check that it's the right character and the player's given. And you'd be surprised how often it isn't. Somebody will give me a list of move these 6 characters to this new area, and I'll check them, and 4 of the 6 are fine, and the other 2 don't belong to them because they've missed the correct character number by a digit or something. Now, if you don't check that, if you just go and trust them and move it, you've just moved 2 characters owned by another player who never wanted them moved, and you don't remember where they've got to go back to, and then you start getting complaints the following turn. You move my character, it's appeared here, I don't know why, because I was just about to do this important thing, and now I'm in the middle of a desert, and what's happened to I was going to get that sword, and now somebody else has picked it up before me, and knock-on problems. And meanwhile, in the desert, they've been eaten by a giant scorpion, and they're not happy about that either. So, this is what can happen if you don't check. So you have to check. And my chair is really squeaky. I don't know if this is going to get picked up on the video, but if it is, all my talking is going to be like accompanied by squeaks. That'll be quite funny. I'll be like Mickey Mouse. So you start to get a picture of why lots of work accumulates in the last day or 2 of the turn, and often rolls on to a couple of days later. And that is why it's not unusual for a deadline to be Sunday and a turn to go out Wednesday. Sometimes Tuesday, sometimes Monday, sometimes Thursday. And if everything goes wrong, that's one of those instances where I end up having to run it a week late and sort of change the stagger of the turn, which I hate doing, because I know you guys don't all know what I do, but I have quite a lot that I do. I don't just do Madhouse. Love Madhouse, it's my favourite thing, don't get me wrong, but I also run a comic shop, and I've got an engineering firm, and I'm a local councillor, and I'm on a lot of voluntary boards and lots of other things. There's lots of bits and bobs that I do. I do discos and karaoke sometimes, so I've got a lot of sort of pressures on my time, and I manage that by a very carefully managed diary, and I have to, because I don't know about you guys, but as I've got older, my ability to remember all the things I've got to do, which was never good in the first place, has deteriorated rapidly. And if I don't keep a firm diary now, I just get in such a mess. So I live my life by my diary. It's absolutely dedicated to it. And people will sometimes say to me, can you do something this Thursday? And I'll say, I don't know. And they'll say, why don't you know? And it's because I haven't got my diary in front of me. If I don't have my diary, I can't commit to something this afternoon, let alone in a week's time, because I just don't remember what it is I've got on. Everything is carefully scheduled. So, scheduled, however you say it. So, I sort of lost my train of thought here, but I have to try and follow what the diary says, and I hate staggering the turn by another week, not only because it loses me money, the company loses a week's income, if you like, by doing that, take a longer to run the turn. It pisses off players who love the game and are waiting for their turns, and rightly so, who wouldn't be annoyed at a delayed service you paid for. And then people are very reasonable, I must add. Mostly people are very reasonable, but you can't do it too often or you just irritate everyone. And then finally, all my diaries, I've probably got diaries booked until perhaps next March. And that's because, like council work, they give you your meetings a year in advance and you put all them in the diary. I'm on town, district and county council, so 3 different councils, so that's 3 different sets of meetings. On top of that, those jobs, you end up on lots of voluntary and kind of community groups, and they all have meetings too. And then I have to travel down to Hertfordshire to work 2 or 3 days a week to manage the business I run there. And then I've got the times the shop open, and then I've got civic events that I have to take part in as a counsellor. And then I've got Demon Rift to run and Dungeon World to run, and a few other things. Like I'm on the background quietly writing a novel, which I've been writing for about 6 years. And all these things take time. So the diary keeps it, and when you suddenly lose a week, every one of your diary plans for when you're going to run the turns of Dungeon World are all wrong, because they all have to now be moved a week, and that creates more knock-on effects with all the rest of your diary. So I hate doing it. But I'm sort of moaning about my problems. I know you don't care about my problems, but it's nice for people to understand why this sort of crux of a turn has always been and probably always will be a problem. And it's not a big deal. I manage it, but I do appreciate that most players are very reasonable about the occasional delays and changes. I try on the Facebook group to let people know what's going on. I update players about the deadlines, and sometimes they will change from what I said in the previous message, but that's because something else has changed that's caused me a problem. But we get there, don't we? And the game runs nicely and has always run nicely, and hopefully will always run nicely for as long as everyone wants to play it. But that's sort of where I am. What else I want to talk about? I want to talk about Paul Malone raised an interesting issue on Facebook. Love Paul, brilliant player. We often have we often have set twos, Paul and I, because we're both quite strong characters, and he's very knowledgeable about IT and about computers and about, I think, about a lot of the things that I do. So he comes to it with a different approach, I suppose. And I am a stubborn, obstinate old man who's getting more stubborn and more obstinate the older I get. And I'm 51, by the way, and nearly I'll be 52 in September. So not getting any younger and not getting any less stubborn. So sometimes we bump heads a little bit, but it's all, I hope it's all in good spirits. But Paul raised this issue. Someone else raised the issue actually. They said one of their characters, Easter, I forget who it is. They start with a skill at level 5, and they didn't realise they started with the skill at level 5. The first thing they did was try and learn that skill. They successfully learnt it and replaced their level 5 skill with a level 1 skill. And Paul said, why? This sounds like a bug. He didn't say bug, but that's the impression I got, is this sounds like a bug, this shouldn't happen. Well, it's not as simple as that, actually. And I thought it'd be quite interesting to explain why it's not as simple as that. So, first of all, some skills, you couldn't do it. So, I suppose you could rightly say, well, if you can put this check in with one skill, why haven't you put a check in with another? And the reason for that is because the two skills operate out of different systems. In the old days, we did skills a different way, and then that was taking too long and too cumbersome and too problematic. So we changed the way we did skills in the game to a different system that we coded to work a different way. And then skills from that point on are made in the new system. So that is why some of the early skills will happen in one way and some of the later skills will happen in another way. Now, to complicate matters, sometimes when you're making a new skill, it's easy to copy an old system rather than make it all afresh. And if the skill is similar enough to one of the early ones, we might use that set, thereby copying the old methodology into the new skill. Not often, but sometimes. So you might say, well, this later skill works this way. And that's because it was copied from a very early skill. But most of the skills after a certain point, which is a good 12, 14 years ago, will work under the new system. And the new system is the one that you've got this issue with, that allows you to replace level 5 skill with a level 1 skill. That's because it's a feature. All of these things, what people perhaps don't realise about the way the game works is a skill is exactly the same as an equipped item. That's exactly what it is. So if you equip a longsword, the minute it goes from your backpack to your equipment, to your equip slot, say the attack hand, you gain whatever bonuses the longsword gives you. All a skill is an item that automatically equips when you get it to a slot that is not listed on your equip slots because it's a skill slot, but it functions exactly the same way, just got a different label on it. That's all skills are. They're just equipped items that do certain things for you. Everything a skill can do, an item can do, and vice versa, because they're the same thing. So, in the old days, I would write a skill this way. We have these things called action groups. They're basically soft code that you code within the editor itself. You don't need to go into the real code of the computer, which is just as well, because it's very hard to change now. But we have these editors which everything is built in, and they're very, very flexible. They're almost like coding systems of their own. That's why we call it soft code. It's almost the same as being a programmer, but without actually changing the core program, you're changing the editors, but that's so complicated. So in you go to the action editor in the old days, and you would say, if the person has written this order and has these stats and this much gold and this much experience and whatever other preconditions you require, then give them this skill if this chance is, and there might be a random roll included, which is all allowed in the editor. So if they meet all the successful conditions, then go on to do this outcome, and the outcome will be give them the skill and whatever other effects you wanted to have, as well as getting the skill if there were any. Perhaps give them an item with the skill or whatever you needed, really. And amongst those preconditions, there might be checks like if they've already got number 1 of this skill, don't do it. If they've already got number 2 of this skill, don't do it. If they've already got number 3 of this skill, don't do it. You could stop them from getting, say, running 1 if they've already got running 2 or running 3 or running 4 or running 5, because it doesn't make sense to, in this instance, to replace a later version of the skill with an earlier version. So that's what Paul is saying. He's saying, I think, I don't want to put too many words in his mouth, but the gist is he's saying, look, you shouldn't be able to replace a later skill with an earlier skill. And I suppose in a way you're right, but there are instances where you might want to. This is why it was coded in a different way. That took a long time because you don't know how many previous copies of a skill there are, so you don't know how many spaces to leave on the sheet. So you're writing your action group and you're writing your preconditions, and you want to say don't give them level 5 if they've already got levels 1, 2, 3 or 4. So that's fine until a skill can have 100 levels. And then you've got to say don't give them level 100 if they've already had 99, 98, 97, 96 and so on all the way down to 1. Well, that's a lot of boxes to check. Now you could say within a range, but you've got to understand it's just a name. The fact that it's running 1, it's just running 1, it's just a name. It's the system doesn't know that it's an earlier version than running 2. It's just a name of the item, if you like. So and that could be changed. You could rewrite the entire game to have skill trees that you work your way up, and that's great, but then you would create other problems later, which I could spend hours talking about. But every decision you take which seems sensible precludes some later decision. So what when we changed the skill system, what we did is we made it so that you could have a skill type, and a type is a number, tends to be the number of the first skill. So let's say running 1 is item number 1000. So it will have skill type 1000. That's just how we remember it. And then running 2 might be skill 1001, but it's skill type 1000. And the system is coded so you can only have one of a skill type that you've put a number. If you don't put a number in the skill type box, you can have as many as you like. But if you've got a number in that skill type box, any new version of it replaces the previous version of it. But it doesn't know which order they come in. So you can replace level 5 with level 1. Now that sounds mad when you're talking about running 1, running 2, running 3, running 4, running 5. But let's imagine that instead you were using a skill set, instead of having a progression of skills, you were using the skill set to make 5 different skills that you had to choose between, but were all equal. Now that's how we do paths, for instance. Paths are equal in terms of the system, but you can only have one path, and that's because they all have the same type. So any new one you get replaces the old one. And that enables you to change your mind later, to say, I didn't want this choice, I wanted this choice, so I'll replace it one with the other. And you could sit there and imagine lots of reasons why. There are even reasons why you might want to roll running 5 back to running 1. What if I wanted to knock it back by the effect of a monster? What if it drained your ability to run? What if there was a monster that knocked your running 5 down a stage to running 4? That wouldn't be possible using some systems which noted it as a tree that you climbed up or down, and instead this is like a set. Now, it's not perfect. Would it be easier for me to in this instance with something like a progression of skills, would it be easier for me to have coded it from the outset to say this leads to this leads to this and goes back in this kind of pattern? Probably, but then that's the only thing I would have used that for. I'd have had to make something else if I wanted this kind of variant skill sets. There's no perfect solutions to it. And I think my view is, look, if you've got running 5, don't go learn running 1. I mean, it's a stupid thing to do. Apologies to the player who did it, because obviously it was a mistake. And we will obviously fix it. But it's so rare for people to make the mistake, and so quick and easy for me to fix. It doesn't seem worth tampering with what is basically the core of how the entire skill and item system works. So Paul, I hope that explains a little bit of the thinking. Now I know Paul will have a whole bunch of extra questions and criticisms of that, but I can assure you we didn't get to this point just by doing things and forgetting about them. Everything has evolved here over 20 years, and quite often we've got to where we are fixing a previous problem. And are all those fixes right? No, I always still think of new things I'd like to do now. But it's much harder now to change the core code. It's lucky that we did it the way we did with very open code, because now I can soft code almost anything I want and I don't ever need to touch that core code. And I'm not sure I'd really want to, because it runs very, touch wood, it runs very, very well, and I don't have any problems that would utterly destroy the game, if you like, that I can't fix. So it's almost a blessing, and if it ain't broke, don't try and fix it. But the code was written on a very early Apple Mac, in a very early version of C, using a compiler that doesn't exist anymore. And trying to access and change that code, that original code now, is very difficult. Very difficult indeed. We could, if we had to, I suppose. If something really went wrong, we would find a way to do it. We'd find the old software and we'd work it out, because you can. But it's just not something anyone wants to put a great deal of time into, because we don't need to. Everything is there. We developed the game so that pretty much anything we might ever want to do, without utterly changing the game, is in there in the editors. So I've got the power to do most of what I want to do. I don't need to change the core code, and I'm loath to mess with it, to be honest, because it's worked so well for so long. Again, touch wood. So I hope that's has given you all some idea of thinking, and I hope you're enjoying the game. I will try and get back to doing these podcasts more regularly. There's lots to talk about at the moment, because Middengast is close. There's lots of other things going on. Some of the missions are getting quite exciting. Some of the new areas I think people are enthused about. Guilds are absolutely going mad. A bunch of guilds have taken over monster dungeons, and I'm just about to start on a huge amount of work in sort of updating those monster dungeons so that they can be a useful addition to the guild, and not just a trophy label, if you like. And various guilds have sent me stuff. I'm getting around to it. Don't worry, guys, it's coming. I've got to get clear the 5 new areas and the special offers first, and then once that's done, we will get on. Oh, and finally, in terms of the special offers, don't forget that at the end of July they're over. That gives you another couple of weeks, but they're good offers, I think, well worth having. And don't run past it, because then there won't be anything else until Halloween. Okay, that's pretty much it for today. So I've been Steve Tierney. This has been the Madhouse UK podcast. Hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you all soon.